Prologue. Efforts never betray you. A saying widely respected and repeatedly preached across the world. Some people regard this quote as a personal mantra to follow throughout their whole life, while others simply scoff at it as if it were a mere joke. I mean, why put effort when you have a super rich dad who provides you with all you need? Big house. Hello, Dad. Can you buy me a house? New car. Daddy, there's this new car that I really love and was wondering if. There are also those that live in luxury simply because they are lucky, like the ones who win a lottery. I mean, how much effort does it take for someone to win a lottery? Congratulations. You have 200 million won. How does efforts never betray you apply here? Of course, setting those examples aside, there were many cases in which the saying proved to be correct. For example, have you seen the movie what was it called? Ah. The Pursuit of Happiness. It is your perfect example of efforts never betray. It's a touching story about a homeless dad living on the streets with his son, who, because of his pure love and dedication for his child, managed to succeed and became a millionaire. Very touching. But what about me? What have I got to say about efforts never betray? It is utter bullshit. Period. Efforts never betray. I could spit at such a ridiculous notion. Sure, if you put in some effort you would definitely achieve better results than the regular mob out there, but is that really all there is to it? Is this the key to success? No. It simply isn't. The key ingredient to success is talent. No matter how much effort you put into something, you would never be able to surpass the insurmountable gulf known as talent. Look at football, for example. Many people train just as hard as Messi or Ronaldo, but in the end, they don't even come close to their level. No matter how much they train, no matter how much blood, sweat, and tears they shed, they would never be able to even touch their ankles. What kind of bullshit is that? Getting back on topic. Why do I have such a grudge against the quote, efforts never betray? Simple. It is because I was one of those idiots that wholeheartedly believed in those words. You see, my parents died when I was 14. Some bastard got drunk and ran them over. I couldn't remember how many times I had cried myself to sleep because of the accident. My parents didn't have siblings, and my grandparents, both maternal and paternal, had already left the world long ago. I was orphaned. Luckily, they had enough money in their bank account to last me until school finished. Thus, I studied as if my life depended on it. It literally did. I would study hours and hours on end, just so that I could enroll at the most prestigious university out there, and later find myself a suitable job. But hold on. How could I possibly afford to go to university? It usually costs a hell of a lot of money, doesn't it? A bank loan. Would they lend a loan to an orphan with neither family nor assets? Well, I still tried to get one. But in the end, I got rejected by the government. But there was still a way. A scholarship. If I managed to secure myself a scholarship, I could attend university without paying a single cent. Luckily, University A, the only university near me, offered a scholarship program that perfectly suited my needs. One of my teachers heard that they only offer one scholarship a year for students of the school I attended. But that was enough for me. If I studied hard enough and achieved an exceptionally high score, I could create a chance. And so I studied. Studied so hard that all the friends I had made over the years became estranged. But I was fine with it. As long as I could attend university, I could make all the friends that I wanted. Was what I thought at that time. But looking back at it now, I could only laugh at how naive I was. Thanks to all the effort I put in, I managed to get in the top 1% of the national exams. But in the end, the scholarship I so wanted never came. Funnily enough, I only found out later that the one who got the scholarship was actually lower rank than me. Apparently, his father was a highly influential person and helped secure the scholarship for him. That scholarship should have been mine. All the sleepless nights and lonely days that I had spent became worthless. I remember screaming my heart out that day. What's even more frustrating was the fact that the father could totally afford to send his son to university without a scholarship. Since you could afford it, why not give it to someone who actually needed it? I wanted to apply to other universities for scholarships, but they were all outside of my city, and I couldn't afford to move. At that point, having exhausted all my family's savings, I was dirt poor. I could barely feed myself through part-time jobs. How could I possibly study in another city where the rent was levels beyond my contemptibly small budget? And thus, left with no choice, I dropped all my studies and continued attending part-time jobs. I slowly sank into depression. I found an escape route in food, manga, and web novels. As I gained weight and found myself putting on more pounds with each passing day, it became increasingly harder for me to continue going to part-time jobs as I would always run out of breath after standing for over 10 minutes. Fortunately, I found myself a new hobby: writing web novels. At first, I took it as a hobby to pass time, but later, as more and more people started reading my novel, a fire that had long been extinguished ignited inside of me, prompting me to continue writing. And I succeeded. My first novel was a hit, and money started coming in. Descent of the Hero. Description: Cipher, an orphan boy from a poor village, hopes of one day becoming a hero and embarks on a tough journey to fight against all odds and fulfill his dreams. Rating: 4.7, 513 reviews. Views: 5.5 m words, 1.3 m. Sure, it was your typical story of hero versus demon king, but what could I say? As long as I liked it, and it made money, it'll do, right? At least that's what I thought at first. But as time progressed and my second and third novels came out, I found myself slowly losing interest. It was not because I hated writing. No, it was simply because of what I was made to write. Because I was catering to my readers, I slowly started straying away from what I truly liked writing. I started writing things that I did not like. For example, people loved fan service, but it was really uncomfortable from a writer's point of view. Especially for a virgin like myself. Fortunately, I had the internet to help me, but it was stuff like this that made my passion for writing decrease. Who would want to write about putting some cucumber in their mouth? Certainly not me. And though I did exactly as my readers asked, apart from the first novel, I never found my books making it in the rankings. Here I am today, blankly staring at my laptop. Click, 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 click. The monotonous sound of a keyboard typing echoed inside of my room. The same boring pattern repeated like any other day. Wake up. Type. Eat. Type. Repeat. Finishing my last sentence, I pressed the save button at the top right of my screen and clicked send. Sigh. Letting out a long sigh, I dazedly looked at my ceiling. How long will I have to continue to do this? Bitterly shaking my head, I gazed at the novel's comment section. Good Guy 85. Author San, I feel like your writing is becoming worse and worse. Greater than Weeboo. Replying to Good Guy 85, I totally agree with you. This novel had so much potential, but I feel like the story started derailing lately. Greater than Truck Driver, I totally agree with you, man. There are too many plot holes in Deus Ex Machina. It's getting ridiculous. Boy Wonder, thanks for the new chapter. Twilight Star, dropped. Boob Monster, hey, where the ecky scenes? Roosterboy 65, dude is married to Mary Sue. Bam. Fuck. What do you mean my writing is getting worse? Slamming the table with my fist, I raged at the computer. I'm tired of this shit. Closing the laptop down, I forcefully tried to calm myself. Getting angry was not good for my blood pressure. I actually quite liked my new novel. This novel was the result of my frustration and desire to try something new so that I could ignite the last remaining embers inside of my heart. It was your typical weak to strong story, but unlike my previous novels, this one was set in a modern, futuristic setting. The story's background starts in 1980 where the Great Cataclysm occurred. A three-stage disaster that hit the Earth, causing the world to drastically change. The first phase of the Great Cataclysm, a shift in tectonic plates all over Earth. Moving countries from where they were previously, it resulted in tsunamis and earthquakes, killing millions. The sudden shift in tectonic plates caused the world map to permanently change, with there only being one landmass surrounded by water. The planet's landmass had become a single supercontinent. Then came the second phase of the Great Cataclysm. Huge portals started appearing all over the world, unknown species emerged from within. They were later identified as demons of the world's oldest mythology. Yet, they were not the only ones to come from those portals. At first, they were docile, but as soon as they deemed humanity weak, they started rampaging all over the place. But, with great disaster comes opportunity. As portals appeared, humanity managed to gain access to mana, a special force that lingered throughout the atmosphere and originated from other worlds. It would allow humans to do things they could have only dreamt of doing in the past, like summoning fireballs or cutting through metal. Lastly, the third phase of the Great Cataclysm. This happens near the end of the novel, and it is when the demon world forces launch a full-scale invasion of Earth. 10 years after the Second Cataclysm, 3 factions ruled the world. The demon faction, the human faction, and the Fantasia faction, which was comprised of orcs, elves, and dwarves. The Fantasia faction was sort of an alliance between the elves, dwarves, and orcs. And that was because they were practically forced into one. Demons were the manifestation of greed. They were created with the sole goal of devouring planets. They would first start by entering a planet. Then, as time progresses, they would reproduce like crazy. And slowly, once they gained enough strength, their armies would devour the whole planet. The elves, orcs, and dwarves were all refugees and survivors from the demons, who had already conquered their home planet. At first, when the 3 races arrived on Earth, they chose to observe. They wanted to see if the humans were worthy enough to join their alliance to fight against the demons. At first, they were excited with the prospect of gaining a potential ally, but as time passed their excitement turned into disappointment, which later became disgust. For the prideful elves, the selfish acts and schemes they witnessed during humanity's darkest moments made all thoughts of collaboration vanish, only to be replaced with utter disdain. To the orcs, the weak and frail body of humans was not only disappointing, but their lack of knowledge in the mystical arts made them feel humanity was even dumber than them. Lastly, the dwarves found humanity's primitive technology worthless. Furthermore, their arrogance made them seem like brainless monkeys who roamed around flaunting their power and intelligence with no substantial backing. In all honesty, all 3 races carried similar traits. The only reason they could tolerate each other was because they were all strong, unlike the humans who had nothing to offer. In the end, the demon faction and the Fantasia faction each claimed 3/8 of the Earth, while humans only claimed 2/8 of their own homeland, which was mainly inhabitable land, making them a mistreated minority. Initially, the story begins with the protagonist enrolling in the Lock, a specialized school established with the effort of all humanity, to raise warriors who can defend the borders against attacks from both factions. He is your typical MC with a tragic past. His parents died due to war at the hands of demons. He seeks vengeance against all demonkind. And so on. It was what you would expect from the MC. It was my masterpiece. At least that's what I thought, but looking through the comment section, I couldn't help but rage. I mean, how would you feel if what you think is your masterpiece gets insulted? Terrible, right? Letting out a long breath, I try to calm myself again. Lately, I've been having anger issues. The simplest thing could get me mad, which just goes to show how bad my temper has become. But it couldn't be helped. With how shitty my life was, I was bound to develop a twisted personality. Goo. Ah. Just when I was about to close my laptop, a sudden pain struck me in my chest. More precisely, my heart. Clenching my chest, I kneeled on the floor. With heavy pants, I forced my way to my desk. I need my medicine. Because of my poor living conditions, I took a lot of medicine. There was one for my blood pressure, another for asthma, and the last one for depression. And right now, I was looking for my blood pressure medicine. Because of my sudden outburst, my blood pressure must have increased, causing this reaction. So as long as I could take my medicine. Gah. Falling to my knees, my vision became blurry. It was starting to get increasingly harder to breathe. Ah, is this how my shitty life ends? Suicidal thoughts clouded my mind. Those were the last words that escaped my mouth before I found the whole world become black. Chirp chirp chirp. Awaking me from my slumber was the peaceful sound of birds chirping. I could faintly feel the warm, gentle sunshine envelop my whole body, causing my lethargic self to feel more energetic. Opening my eyes, I found myself inside a one-bedroom apartment. Rubbing my eyes to make sure I was still not sleeping, I blinked a couple of times and once more looked at my strange surroundings. Aren't I supposed to be dead? Was what I thought at first, but seeing that I was still breathing and seeing just fine, I thought that perhaps someone had rescued me moments before I died, and maybe I was in a hospital right now. But with each passing second, I realized that this was not the case. Why? Simple. It was because a large screen appeared right in front of me, startling the living daylights out of my mind. Status. Name, Ren Dover. Rank, G. Strength, G. Agility, G. Stamina, G. Intelligence, G. Mana capacity, G. Luck, E. Charm, G. To profession, swordsmanship LVL. 1. 999 plus comments 0 votes and gifts. I've reincarnated inside of my novel 1. A multitude of questions emerged in my mind as I blankly stared at the floating screen in front of me. Ren Dover. Who was that? As far as I remember my name was. What was my name? Sitting up on the bed, a blank look appeared on my face as I dazedly looked towards the window on my left. Jet black hair. Pale white skin. Blue ocean-like eyes. What was reflected on the surface of the window was not my face, rather it was a completely unknown face. It had rather attractive features, but it wasn't a face that would make people scream, "He's so handsome." Eyes aside, it was a pretty average face. One that you would forget after not seeing for a couple of days. Moving on to the body, this new body was rather skinny, it had some definition but it could definitely do with a bit more muscle. But this was definitely not my body. I was supposed to be fat. Yet, looking at the reflection in the mirror I couldn't deny that it was me who was controlling the body as each time I touched my face, the reflection on the window also showed the youth reflected in the mirror touching his face. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I looked at my now skinny legs which I had not seen since my high school days and stood up. Goo. Stumbling a couple of steps, I felt a wave of pain wash over my head as I started experiencing a massive migraine followed by a severe case of vertigo. Pain. Pain. Excruciating pain that I had never felt before engulfed my entire being as I leaned my hand on the wall as a means to support my body. Huff. Huff. For what may have seemed to be hours, passed by in seconds, and the pain slowly subsided leaving me huffing and panting on the ground heavily gulping for air. It was only after 10 minutes that I finally managed to stand back up. Glancing around the room, a simply decorated room lay before me. The room was furnished with the basic necessities that comprised of a clean white bed, an old wooden spacious desk, a tall wardrobe, and a small bathroom. As I looked around, on top of the desk, I saw a strange tablet-looking object. Being desperate for answers, I immediately walked over to the desk where the table-like object was, in hopes of figuring out what was going on. As I was walking, a strange sensation tickled my brain, as I felt a sense of discontinuity between my movements. At first, I thought it may have perhaps been due to me suddenly becoming skinny, but actually, more than me not being used to moving due to my body transformation, it was more like I was not used to this body at all. It almost felt as if there was a lag in my movements. But as I gradually moved more, the time lag slowly disappeared. I don't know what it was, but maybe it was because my soul still didn't get used to this new body. Well, setting that aside, there was one important thing that I had to confirm. I had a hunch about what had happened, but I needed to confirm it, and what better way than through the tablet on the desk. Arriving before the tablet, I carefully tapped the screen, and then wham! Holographic information one after another starts appearing before me, startling me. Calming myself down, I looked at the information that was projected before me. User ID, Rendover. Age, 16. Picture, holographic image of myself. Program, Hero Program Year 1. School rank, 1750-2055. Potential, D rank. Profession, swordsman. I see. Looking at the information in a daze, I let out a bitter laugh. It seems that I reincarnated into my own novel, and as a random character that had nothing to do with the story to boot. Not the protagonist, but a completely unknown mob. I, the author, should obviously know every character in the novel, but who in the world was Rendover? I never created such a character. But looking at how things were, I should probably not consider this world a novel anymore, as I was literally breathing and moving inside of what seemed to be the plot of my novel. If you were wondering as to why I am remaining so calm in this situation, it's simple really. I hated my previous life. During my last breath, I had realized that I really did not care if I died. During my last moments, the only thing I thought was, it's a pity I died like this. I don't know when, but at some point, I already had given up on life. But oddly enough, it seemed that I got myself a second chance in life and as a character of my own unfinished novel to boot. Though it's a real bummer I wasn't reincarnated as the protagonist. Actually, that was a total lie. Who in the world wants to be the protagonist? Me. Ha. Are you crazy? Why in the world would I want to be some justice-driven fool who attracts danger wherever he goes? I just got a new life, why in the world would I throw it away like that? I ain't stupid. Although I am jealous of his would-be harem. I mean, I did make them beauties, but who cares? I stayed a virgin for my whole 32 years of life, so it's not gonna hurt if I remained a virgin for a little bit longer. Setting my virginity aside, this world has magic and skills. There's no way I was going to spend my time flirting with girls when I could spend the time practicing magic. I could already visualize myself casting huge fireballs. Just the thought makes me grin. I mean, how could I not be excited? I came from a world where magic doesn't exist, and now that I have access to it, I will definitely learn it. But wait. Considering how they put my potential as D rank, it would mean they evaluated my talent to be low or medium at best. There's no way I was going to survive the third cataclysm with this low level of talent. Placing my hand on my chin, I immediately started to plan my future. Although my talent is low compared to the others inside of the lock, if we take into account that AD rank talent is extremely sought after in other academies, I could probably live comfortably once I graduate from the lock. But, if I were to take the seed of limit, I could permanently remove my limit. But that would affect the protagonist. Actually, considering the fact that his talent has already been graded as SSS, it shouldn't really be a problem if I take it right. Considering the fact that later the MC gets a similar item in the future, it shouldn't be a problem, no. I just realized it now, but didn't I create a total cheat character? Setting that seed of limit aside, I gave him the highest possible talent and also gave him the best equipment. Isn't this a little bit too unfair? Now that I was in the novel, I could kind of see what the readers were saying about the protagonist being a bit too overpowered. Yup, I need to rebalance the protagonist. Definitely not an excuse that I made up so that I could get some of the equipment for myself. Putting my shoes on and taking the keys to my room, which were left at the entrance of the apartment, I left the room. Even if the protagonist doesn't take that seed of limit, he would be able to exceed his limit thanks to other cheat items I've given him, so I guess it's fine if I take it. From the very first moment I was reincarnated, I had decided, I will live how I want to. Screw, efforts never betray. Only a cheat like me who knows future events and where the cheat items were, could become successful. Setting my foot outside of the lock, I felt a nice gentle breeze pass by me. Phew. How refreshing. Stretching my arms, I headed towards the train station. The academy should be starting in a week, so I have to find any means possible to increase my stats during that 1 week. I believe at this point the MC was already rank E borderline D, which was leagues above a rank G like me. So I've got to use this week well in hopes of catching up with the protagonist a little bit. Right now, my first priority was getting that seed of limit. By removing my limiter, not only will I be able to reach greater heights, but I'll also be able to train faster. That was because the closer one gets to their limit, the slower their training becomes. Hence why the higher your potential was, the greater your training speed was. In order for me to find that seed of limit, I must head towards the Clayton Ridge in the outskirt of Ashton City, the city that I was currently in, which was also known as the capital of humanity. After the first cataclysm, the world map completely changed. Before Earth was a huge body of water with separate continents spread across it: Africa, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Oceania. But after the cataclysm, all continents merged into one, creating one large continent. Currently, humanity occupied the east side of the newfound continent, right where Asia used to be. New infrastructures and cities were built, and among all the cities that were built, 5 cities stood out from the rest. Conviction City, Dromeda City, Lewington City, Park City, and lastly Ashton City, the current human capital. Now, why were these cities so important? It's because they were humanity's last safeguard. Each city safeguards the borders of the human territory from potential invasions and threats coming from demons and other races. Conviction City stood at the very north of the human border and safeguarded humanity against the potential threat coming from the orcs, who were a war-driven species. Brutus, the current leader of the orcs, was especially fearsome, as he was regarded as the one-man general in the battlefield. His fearsome display of strength may come as a shock to many people as they each become flabbergasted at his cruel and fearsome strength. Dromeda City safeguards the western area, which was right at the edge of the demon territory and the elven territory. Fortunately, the elves, unlike the orcs, were not a war-oriented race, hence the only source of worry was the demons. But even if the elves don't participate in the war, the demons' fearsome strength was leaving Dromeda on their wits' end. Lewington City safeguarded the southern area of the human territory and protects against demons coming from the south. Like Dromeda, they were constantly harassed by demons, but unlike there, it was in a far more dire situation compared to Dromeda. Dromeda borders with the elven territory, and as a result, the demons were forced to split their forces to protect themselves from potential ambushes from the elves, easing the burden they face when fighting against the demons. In Lewington, however, the situation was much worse. There were no elves, no orcs, and no dwarfs. There was no other faction nearby that would cause the demons to split their forces. Therefore, when demons invade, Lewington City faces the full grunt of the demons, causing large amounts of resources to be wasted every year. Park City, on the other hand, was located on the east side, and compared to the previous cities it had one noticeable difference, and that was the fact that it directly faced the sea. That was, it had to fend off against sea creatures. After the second cataclysm, due to the sudden burst in mana coming from the other worlds, animals started going into a frenzy. At first, it seemed like they had completely lost their minds, but later, after a few days, changes started happening. The most noticeable difference would be their insane growth in height and extreme bloodthirst. What could have been your cute little puppy an hour ago, turned into a demonic beast that would eat you whole in just a couple of minutes. Luckily, it seemed that they did not gain any intelligence, hence they were not necessarily a threat as long as they were left alone. Lastly, there was Ashton City, the center of humanity. The last barrier that protects humanity against any outside threats. The most secure location available in the area where the Lock resided. The ultimate training academy that was known to mankind, created for the sole purpose of creating ultimate heroes who will lead the charge to reclaim Earth. The Lock was a huge facility that spanned over kilometers and boasted top-end training facilities. It had over 20,000 dorm rooms, 800 training facilities, 1,000 classrooms, and 2,000 highly trained professionals and teachers to tend to the students' catering. There were many privileges in being a student from the Lock, and one of them was the fact that you could gain access to all public transportations for free, like how I was doing right now. Here's my card. Passing my student card to the lady in the ticket office, I checked the map of the station. Oh. You are a student from the lock. Glancing at my card in surprise, the ticket lady sat upright and carefully looked at me. Yes. Where to? Station 24 near the Clayton Ridge, please. Glancing up and down, the ticket lady suddenly smiled at me and handed me my student card as well as a ticket. I see, have a safe trip. Thank you. Like that, I boarded the air train to the Clayton Ridge. 85 comments, 0 votes, send gifts. I've reincarnated inside of my novel too. What made air trains so special was the fact that they levitated in the air, and produced almost no sound throughout the whole journey, making them a convenient means of transportation. Thanks to its smooth aerodynamic design, air trains produced low drag, which in turn allowed them to conserve energy and reach speeds of up to 600 km per hour. As I looked at the interior of the train, I couldn't help but be impressed. Maybe it was because I got special treatment, but the area I was designated to had a private desk and a snack bar for me to freely use. Lazily stretching my back, I comfortably sat down in my designated seat and looked outside the window. Perhaps it was because it was still summer, but, even though it was almost 9 p.m., the sunlight still brightly lit the surroundings. The station, which was moderately packed, was a scene that you would have only been able to see if you were inside of a movie. Rows of platforms stood next to each other, and every couple of minutes you could see air trains departing, and new ones taking over the empty spaces left by them. The air trains, which were levitating from the ground, were connected to long metal wires that stretched all the way to the horizon, and with their constantly producing magnetic field, allowed air trains to swiftly move unobstructed. We will be departing soon, please be seated. Clank. A beautiful voice entered my ears, and the doors automatically shut. Suddenly underneath me, I felt a strange pushing sensation, similar to when a plane was taking off, and gradually the air train floated in the air. A couple of seconds after levitating in the air, the train gradually picked up its speed and left the station. Next stop, Station 15, Collington Park. Staring at the constantly changing scenery before me, I sank into deep thought. Right now I was on my way towards the Clayton Ridge to collect that seed of limit, but if I want to remotely come close to the protagonist level, then I must also get my hands on a sword art. A sword art, or more specifically a martial manual, were manuals that were developed since the beginning of the Second Cataclysm and consisted of martial techniques that had existed since ancient times. With the addition of mana, ancient martial techniques which were long forgotten were restructured and remodeled to take into account the mana that lingered in the atmosphere, and shockingly enough the techniques that were once deemed as useless transformed into some of the most powerful moves that could be performed by a human. Since the discovery of the adaptability that martial techniques had regarding the control and use of mana, martial manuals suddenly became extremely coveted, and as a result, they slowly started disappearing from the public view due to government and powerful individuals' intervention. The government primarily did it to prevent the manuals from landing in the wrong hands, but with regards to the powerful individuals, it was more of a power move to monopolize the manuals to themselves. Martial manuals were separated into 5 grades: 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, and finally 5 stars, with 1 star being the lowest grade and 5 stars being the highest grade possible. Each grade was determined by how powerful the art became upon mastery, and the difference between each grade was fairly substantial, just like the difference between a person's rank. When choosing a manual, the most important thing was not the grade but whether the manual was compatible with you. If you had a talent for swordsmanship but practiced a spear-related manual, chances were that regardless of how high the grade of the manual was, you would never be able to fully unleash the full potential of the manual. Looking at my status, I couldn't help but turn my attention towards my profession section, Swordsmanship LVL. 1. Status. Name, Ren Dover. Rank, G. Strength, G. Agility, G. Stamina, G. Intelligence, G. Mana capacity, G. Luck, E. Charm, G. To profession, Swordsmanship LVL. 1. I don't know whether this was a coincidence or not, but the protagonist also has a talent for swordsmanship. Which in hindsight was advantageous for me as I know every cheat skill he gets for his swordsmanship profession. In particular, a certain sword art catches my interest. The Kiki style, swords art. When I was coming up with different sword arts to give to the protagonist, I came up with 3 different styles. The Kiki style, the Levisha style, and the revolve style, which were all 5-star manuals. The Kiki style, the one that interests me the most, was a swords art that required an inhuman level of speed when drawing a sword. In the setting I created, it was a sword art that Grandmaster Toshimoto Kiki created. He was a Japanese sword practitioner who later became famous for his unrivaled strength. He was also one of the first humans to awaken mana during the second phase of the Cataclysm. As Grandmaster Kiki was already a respected swordsman even before the second Cataclysm, when mana made its way into the world, once he awakened, his human restraint was severed, resulting in the creation of the Kiki style. An incredibly powerful sword art where the user would draw the sword from the scabbard so quick that by the time the opponent feels danger she was already dead. It was a one-draw one-kill type of style. Because it was a one-draw one-kill type of style, its flaw was fairly obvious. That was, you no longer hold the advantage over the opponent once they successfully defended the first attack. The second style was the Levisha style. Grandmaster Levisha, who also awakened at the same time as Grandmaster Kiki, created his own unique sword art. Unlike the Kiki style, the Levisha style operated differently. That was, it was a much more beautiful sword art. When writing the novel I remembered describing it as a swords art that would mesmerize anyone who caught sight of the art. Though it was an extremely beautiful sword art, you should by no means underestimate it, as it was just as deadly as it was beautiful. Probably the most balanced swords art out of the 3, but in terms of offense it was not as good as both the Kiki style and the revolve style, who specialized in offense. Lastly, the revolve style. The most infamous swords art of the 2. To call it a sword art was, by all means, a compliment. No fancy swing, no fancy move, it relied just purely on raw physical strength that overwhelmed every opponent that came across it. It was a series of random swings with no foundation behind them, but at the same time, because of the user's enormous strength, it allowed them to easily overwhelm the opponent. Why was it infamous? Simple, because anyone who practiced the swords art would find themselves suffering unbearable pain. In order for one to train the revolve style, the requirement was to reforge the human body by restructuring the flesh and bones within the human body to better suit the art style. It was a gruesome and painful procedure that could mentally break down anyone who tried practicing it. Although there was a high chance of a mental breakdown, if you managed to practice the revolve style successfully, you were basically guaranteed inhuman strength that would make anyone fear you. Going back as to why I was interested in the Kiki style with respect to the other 2 arts. There were actually 2 main reasons. One was that personally, my favorite art out of the 3 was the Kiki style. I mean, why wouldn't it be? Imagine facing hundreds of opponents, when suddenly all their heads fall off with you looking like you hadn't done anything. Wasn't that totally badass? Secondly, I couldn't possibly take the Levisha style, as it belonged to the protagonist. I couldn't be changing the scenario too much, or else my dream of a peaceful life would go to waste. Also, the revolve style was far too brutal for me to even bother learning it. I am by no means a masochist. At first, when writing the novel I wanted the protagonist to practice the Kiki style, but the more I wrote the more I figured it did not match his character, and thus I discarded the Kiki style. Fortunately, by some sort of twist of fate, I am now inside my own novel and could now wash away my regrets and practice the Kiki style. Moreover, I don't have to worry about the repercussions of learning the swords art, as me learning it won't affect the plotline of the novel. I decided to learn the Kiki style right after I collecting that seed of limit. Thankfully, the location of where the sword art was located was not that far off from the Clayton Ridge, and so by the end of the week, I should be able to have both the seed of limit and the Kiki style. Next stop, Station 24 Clayton Ridge. Waking me up from my deep thoughts, was a beautiful voice coming from the train speaker. Taking a glimpse outside the window, I could see huge mountains in the distance. As the tectonic plates shifted, it caused continents to clash against each other, resulting in huge mountains and ridges suddenly appear across the world. The current Clayton Ridge was the result and aftermath of Japan hitting the east side of China, causing the ground to be elevated and creating a chain of mountains. Standing below the huge majestic mountains and admiring the sight, I couldn't help but sigh. This really isn't a novel anymore. It all still feels unreal to me. As the creator of the novel, I always have this feeling of incredulity. It all feels fake. The buildings, the people, the map, everything was just as I had written in the novel. Nothing was out of the ordinary. Sometimes I wonder if this was all fruit of my imagination, and I was in a coma somewhere dreaming of this. But breathing the fresh air, and smelling the sharp, sweet, and refreshing smell coming from the pine trees before me, I could almost be certain that everything before me was real. With renewed vigor, I start my climb up the mountain. Huff, huff. The terrain was rougher than I expected, making it hard for me to collect my breath as I move up the mountain. I have to stop a couple of times to check my bearing, as there was no path for me to directly follow. 3 hours had already passed since my journey up the mountains, and although my breathing was a bit rough, I wasn't that tired. Well, considering the fact that I had ready condensed mana inside of my body, it really shouldn't come as a surprise that I managed to last this long. Keep in mind that if a normal human with no mana concentration in their body were to climb this mountain, they would by no means reach the same point as me. Then again, I really shouldn't compare myself with normal humans, since anyone in the academy would last much longer than me. Right now I was making my way towards the third highest peak, where a small cave containing the seed of limit resided. Because I only spent a couple of sentences describing where to find the seed of limit, I don't know the exact location of the cave. I only know that it's on the third highest peak of the Clayton Ridge. Knowing that looking for the cave was almost like looking for a needle in a haystack, I've already mentally prepared myself for a long arduous search. Hopefully, I won't waste too much time, else I might be spending days here, which I simply couldn't afford to do. Just as I had arrived below the third highest peak, I squinted my eyes. I could already see the sun trying to hide itself behind the mountains, reducing my visibility considerably. Clenching my fist, I decided to do one last struggle and climb my way towards the third peak. This was a really reckless decision on my part, as I would be directly climbing the mountain, unlike before where I just hiked. Moreover, because the sun was setting and my range of visibility was decreasing by the minute, it made it even harder for me to climb up the mountain, as a slight slip could cost me my life. Climbing the mountain at this time was totally reckless, but it's not like the protagonist was waiting for me to catch up to him, and thus I steeled my mind and slowly climbed up the mountain. Feeling the cold rock in between my hand, I increased the grip of my hands and carefully moved up the mountain. If I don't manage to find the cave soon, I would probably be forced to camp somewhere on top of the mountain, which wasn't exactly ideal. Halfway up the mountain, and 2 hours into my climb, I could already feel my hands becoming numb from the constant climbing. The sun, which had set long ago, only left endless darkness, making it impossible for me to see more than a couple of meters ahead of me. As the nights progressed, the cold kicked in, further adding to the difficulty of the climb. It was already hard to climb before, but now things got even harder. Not to mention that my whole body started aching like crazy. Gritting my teeth, I endured the stinging pain coming from my arms and continued my way up. Inserting my feet into a narrow gap, I paused and looked up. Although it was dark, I could still see a couple of meters ahead of me. Squinting my eyes, I saw a small protruding rock coming from the top left of my view. Remembering a similar description from my novel, my eyes lit up and I forced my body to climb up near the rock. Placing my hand on top of the rock and applying some pressure, I was able to confirm that this was the right place, as a small gap appeared behind the rock. Applying a little bit more pressure, I moved the rock further to the side, allowing me to see what's right behind the rock. Bingo! Smiling widely, I used all my strength and pushed the rock outwards, causing it to fall down, opening a small gap for which a single person could enter. Bang! After 10 seconds of free fall, a large sound could be heard from below the mountain, sending shivers down my spine. Had that been me, I would have likely turned into an omelette if anything else. Turning my attention back to the cave, I slowly pushed my body inside the small gap. As I entered the small hole, I crawled my way forward for a couple of meters until a wide opening appeared before me. Increasing my pace, I entered the cave. As soon as I entered the cave, I felt all the energy drain out of my body, causing me to weakly slump on the ground. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. From the moment I entered the Clayton Ridge to the moment I reached the cave, all I did was non-stop physical work. I hiked non-stop for 3 to 4 hours and then climbed 3/4 up the third peak. If it wasn't for the fact that I had already awakened by the time I reincarnated into the novel, I would have already been exhausted halfway through the hike. Let me be clear. I was also extremely lucky throughout the journey. That was, I did not encounter a single animal. Since most animals who were exposed to mana turned berserk, I expected some kind of encounter against one of such animals in the mountain, but fortunately for me, I had come prepared as I brought a low-grade beast repellent that warded away any beast below G rank. Thus, thanks to the repellent, I encountered 0 beasts, which in turn helped me preserve some of my energy, allowing me to find this place faster. Leaning against the wall of the cave, I slowly regained some of my energy. Glancing around, all I could see was a huge cave that I couldn't see the end of. Smiling to myself, I got up and moved towards the depth of the cave. It's about time I upgrade myself. 77 comments, 0 votes, send gifts. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. Entrail_G. Download app now. I've reincarnated inside of my novel 3. Ha. Letting out a long breath, I dazedly stared at the scenery presented before me. I expected something out of the norm, but this. Overwhelmed would be the perfect word to describe the sensation I was feeling at the moment. A huge towering tree stood in front of me. Its large roots deeply penetrated the hard rock, almost as if it was made of clay, and its lush green leaves made one wonder if there really was no sunlight here. Right on the top of the tree was a pale red fruit that looked extremely succulent. It resembled a peach, but contrarily to a regular peach, it had a yellow glow enveloping it, making it clear that it wasn't just your regular peach that you could get from the supermarket. Taking a deep breath, I looked directly at the fruit that contained the seed of limit with burning desire. This is it. Once I get my hands on the fruit, my future will change entirely. I thought as my eyes couldn't detach themselves from the pale red fruit that sat on top of the tree. I will no longer be some good-for-nothing author who lazes around his house, raging at his own readers. No. Instead of writing others' stories, I will be writing my own, and... Glancing at the fruit above me, I raise my hand and slowly clench it. It all starts from that fruit. Getting the fruit wasn't actually that hard. In the first place, it was supposed to be an accidental find by the protagonist for when he explored the Clayton Ridge during his elective. Moreover, if I don't remember incorrectly, I don't think the protagonist even got his hands on the fruit, as by the time he came the only thing he found was that seed of limit. I kind of feel guilty for saying this, but when I was writing this part of the novel, I totally forgot to add a trial. You know. Like the obstacle the protagonist needed to overcome in order to boost his own power. If this was a typical novel, there should have been a guardian protecting the fruit, or at least some sort of defensive mechanism that made it hard for the protagonist to easily claim the fruit, but I just couldn't bring myself to write one, as this would have been considered in a certain sense a small upgrade for the protagonist. The main purpose was to speed up the protagonist training by removing his limiter, thus I didn't really add any trial. This lazy me did it so that I could finish the novel faster, as at that point I was already bored of the novel. But now that I am holding the fruit in my hands, I realized how complacent and stupid I was. I mean, this was a total cheat item. No wonder the readers started getting mad at me. I was totally overgearing the protagonist. Moreover, that seed of limit was essentially a guaranteed ticket to stardom, as it severed the restraint a human would have on their capabilities. Actually, that may not necessarily be true. Although that seed of limit could be considered a cheat item, it wasn't necessarily that overpowered. Although it removed one's limit, it did not mean that it improved one's talent. In actuality, a person's talent remains the same, and apart from the fact that one would have no limit and their training speed increased, that seed of limit did not help in regards to actual talent. For example, if a person who has no talent in regards to fighting suddenly takes the seed of limit, they will not suddenly turn into some sort of god of war. No, if such an item were to actually exist, I might as well just drop the novel and be done with my day. I mean, who would bother reading a novel where the protagonist doesn't overcome any hurdles and just bulldozes his way to the top? Fortunately, I wasn't dumb enough to create such an item. With that seed of limit one could only remove their rank cap, but other than just faster training speed that seed of limit didn't do much. Moreover, even if a talentless person took that seed of limit they could at most train their stats to be absurdly strong, but if they were to face someone just as strong as they were then they would instantly be defeated. Still, imagine if the seed landed in the hands of a talented individual that wasn't the main protagonist. Just the thought sends me shivers. Forcefully pushing down my feelings of guilt, I carefully observed the fruit. Its pale red color added with its holy-like glow that was enveloping it, made it seem like I was holding a fruit straight out from heaven. Swallowing the saliva that was stuck inside of my throat, I gently opened my mouth and took a small bite out of the fruit. Instantly an overwhelming sweetness enveloped my taste buds, making them dance with joy. The juices coming from the fruit overflowed inside of my mouth, and the succulent taste coming from the fruit made me momentarily forget everything around me. Shortly after gulping the first bite of the fruit, I could feel my body changing. My eyes became sharper, my head became clearer and my muscles became more explosive. I could feel myself slowly becoming stronger. Glancing at my status, I noticed my stats changing with every passing second, and as I felt and saw myself change, a wave of euphoria washed over me, prompting me to greedily eat the fruit before me. The more I ate the more I felt every fiber of my body becoming sturdier and stronger. Status. Name, Ren Dover. Rank, G+. Strength, G+. Agility, G+. Stamina, G+. Intelligence, G+. Mana capacity, G+. Luck, E. Charm, G. To profession, swordsmanship LVL. 1. Ha. Using my shirt to wipe away the juices that lingered around my mouth, I took a good look at my status window. As I looked at my status window I couldn't help but look at my charm stats. Why wasn't my charm increasing? I know that I wasn't particularly handsome, but I mean all stats except for luck, which was already quite high, increased a notch or two. Why couldn't you just spare a couple of points on my charm? Was I destined to be a virgin? Slap. Slapping my cheeks to forcefully clear my dark thoughts away, I stared at my hands. A small brown seed nestled in between my hands. Is this the seed of limit? Now that I paid close attention to it, I really couldn't determine the difference between this seed and any other seed that could have been both from a supermarket. It was neither too big nor too small, just about the size of a coin, and if it weren't for the fact that it came from the holy-like fruit, I would have in no way have been able to tell this was the seed of limit. I mean, it looked so normal that I wouldn't be surprised if someone would just laugh at me if I were to tell them this was a cheat item. But of course, since I am the author, I know that this normal-looking seed is in fact the key to my future. I had mentioned this before, but the protagonist never actually ate the fruit. Why? Because he never had a chance in the first place. In the original plot, the protagonist and his classmates would go on an elective in the Clayton Ridge. During the excursion, the first to find this place wasn't the protagonist, but the protagonist's rival. Once the rival found the tree containing the fruit, he immediately ate the fruit and discarded the normal-looking seed, which was later found by the protagonist, who by sheer luck managed to discover its effect and ate it. Yes, I know. I was currently reflecting on myself. The more time I spend in this world, the more I realize how depressing my writing was. Now that I think about it, since I ate the fruit, I kind of prevented the rival from upgrading himself. This wasn't good. The rival was vital to the plot. He was one of the reasons why the protagonist managed to become so strong. Me indirectly affecting his growth is also indirectly affecting the protagonist's growth. I guess I'll make it up to them later. Since I've already done the deed, I couldn't really turn back time and undo what I did. Instead of worrying about it now, I'll just do what I was best at. And that was leaving problems for later. I'll just owe them one later. Taking a deep breath, I carefully scrutinized the seed in my hand and slowly placed the seed at the top of my tongue. Gulp. Swallowing the seed, I sat down on the ground and waited for the seed of limit to kick in. Then, 1 minute passed. 2 minutes passed. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes passed, and still, nothing happened. Just when I was about to think that something was wrong, an overflowing amount of energy came crashing down my body. It felt as if a dam had burst, making my veins and body withstand the grunt of the water escaping out of the dam. Excruciating would have been the best word to describe how I was feeling, as I felt an indescribable pain wash over my body. The pain was so intense that no words nor screams escaped from my mouth. It felt as if all my bones and veins shattered at once. The last thing I saw before I passed out was the humongous tree inside of the cave slowly withering away. I really am reckless. I don't know how much time had passed since I passed out, but that didn't really matter at the moment. My body ached all over, making it hard for me to stand. Collecting myself, I slowly reached out for my bag's front pocket, from which I took out a small rectangular tablet. Tapping on the screen, a 3D holographic image of myself popped up. I was still not used to the holographic thing and all, hence whenever the holographic data pops up in front of me, I flinch every time. Swiping right, I unlock the tablet and check the date. Time, 6:47. Date, the 9th of July 2055. Mail 5 calls 0 messages 0 browser. Closing the tablet, I sighed in relief. Only 3 hours had passed since I passed out. Fortunately for me, I did not pass out for days. If on the unfortunate occasion that I did not manage to wake up prior to the opening of the academy, I would have been in big trouble. Normally I wouldn't have cared about skipping classes, as I don't want to repeat what I've been through back in high school, but since I designed the lock, I already know how strict the instructors were. Especially to those who were not highly ranked, like me. They were merely treated as like dispensable people who will later die on the front lines. Hence, if you get on the bad side of some professors, it'd be best if you pack up, as you will probably never be able to graduate from there. This was the last thing I wanted, as there were so many things I needed to accomplish in the lock before I could safely go outside of the human territory. Firstly, I needed to participate in a couple of events that will happen inside of the lock. But wouldn't participation affect the plotline? Of course, it would, but because I don't know whether my reincarnation has had any effect on the plot of the story, I will need to personally check myself and see if the storyline was still the same as what I wrote. So far everything seemed to be the same, but if by chance my reincarnation has had a butterfly effect on the story, it could create disastrous consequences. So, taking this into consideration, I decided to step in and help in the case that something deviates from the plotline. Secondly, as the Lock was the foremost academy in developing heroes in the entire humanity, it would be a total loss for me to miss it. If I want to become strong enough to survive the third cataclysm, I should definitely not miss the chance that was presented to me. With their state-of-the-art facilities, it would take no time for me to become strong enough to live comfortably on my own. But before I do that, I must first get my hands on the sword art so that I don't get kicked out on my first year due to my lack of talent. Just like any regular academy, if you don't pass the year you get held back a year. Thus if I don't get my hands on the Kiki style, even with my limits broken thanks to the seed of limit, I would by no means be guaranteed to pass the first year. It's not like I could become super strong immediately. Without effort and time, I couldn't catch up to the protagonist and his companions. Checking my status, I noticed that after having consumed the seed of limit my stats did not increase. Well, I'd be surprised if it did, as the seed of limit was an item primarily focused on breaking the level cap of a user, unlike the fruit that focused on increasing the stats. But the fact that I am no longer bound by the laws of this world, I could freely train as much as I want to without worrying about reaching a bottleneck. It actually took me longer than expected to get out of the cave. Precisely 2 hours after I woke up I managed to safely get out of the cave. It wasn't because I couldn't find the exit, no, that part was actually easy, but it was the fact that my body refused to listen to me. I could somehow move my arms but it was extremely stiff. For a solid hour, I had to slowly tense my muscles starting from my fingers down to my toes. This was because all my muscles refused to listen to me. It felt as if the body which I had just gotten used to became foreign again, almost like when I just reincarnated in this body. Ha! Finally some fresh air. Taking a deep breath outside I felt my body slowly relax, helping me regain some of my energy. The air outside was incomparably different compared to the air inside of the cave, which was extremely stuffy. Staring towards the east with my improved vision, I could catch a glimpse of the huge megacity on the horizon. The tall skyscrapers and the ever-moving sky trains that operated non-stop made the city look extremely lively. Beautiful was the only word that I could mutter as I stared at Ashton City. It's truly fascinating how despite humanity's situation they managed to unite and build such a beautiful city. And now this beautiful city that I was staring at was my new home. Alright. With renowned vigor, I immediately head down the mountains. It's about time I collected the Kiki style. 52 comments, 0 votes, send gifts. Sword art 1. If nothing had changed then the sword art should be located a couple of kilometers behind the Clayton Ridge. It took me 5 hours to hike all the way down the mountain, and a further 10 hours to reach the approximate area of where the sword art was located. A large forest that spanned over several kilometers appeared before my view, and as I reached the entrance of the forest, without even thinking twice I chose to enter. Although I was exhausted from constantly moving all day, I decided to grit my teeth and continue my journey. Some might say I was too impatient with regards to how I was neglecting my body in search of cheat items, but I beg to differ. Not only was I reincarnated inside a world where the weak were prey to the strong, but in the near future, if one was not strong enough, only death awaited them. If I want to be strong enough in hopes to overcome the certain death flags that awaited me, my only option was to increase my strength as much as possible. Every minute that I saved was a minute I could use to train myself. Despite being dark outside, my vision was fairly unaffected, partly due to my improved body condition, which was all due to the miraculous fruit I had previously eaten. The only problem was the fact that I was in the middle of a forest. So even if my visibility was clear, it was still hard to make out what was in front of me. If I don't remember wrong, there should be a river nearby. My current goal as of now was to look out for a river that directly flowed from the highest peak of the Clayton Ridge. For thy that seek the way of the sword, follow the road flowing through the highest peak. When the protagonist was clearing a dungeon, he stumbled across 3 ancient scrolls that were neatly laid next to each other, and the content of one of the scrolls had those precise words inscribed on them. At first, the protagonist didn't understand the meaning of the words in the scroll, but eventually with the aid of one of his companions he managed to figure out the meaning of those words. Sadly, by the time he had figured out what the contents of the scroll were about, it was already too late. At first, the protagonist didn't understand the meaning of the words in the scroll, but eventually with the aid of one of his companions he managed to figure out the meaning of those words. Sadly, by the time he had figured out what the contents of the scroll were about, it was already too late, as the protagonist had already learned that Levisha-style sword art. But this was perfectly fine with me, as I really like the Kiki style. In simple terms, the scroll was telling the protagonist to follow the river coming from the highest peak of the Clayton Ridge. The word, road, accompanied by, flowed, referred to a river, and, highest peak, referred to the highest mountain within the human territory, which was in the Clayton Ridge. And right now I was looking for that exact river. It didn't take long for me to find the river, but by the time I found it I was really exhausted. I think I've been at it for more than 18 hours at this point. No matter how much I wanted to continue, my body would just refuse to listen to me, and thus I was left with no choice but to camp near the river. These past 2 days could probably add up to the total amount of exercise I've done in the last decade of my life. Never before had I done this much physical activity. Even if I had condensed mana and my body could keep up, I don't think the same could be said for my mental state. As I felt my thought process diminish with every passing second, I continued moving. The first thing I did once I arrived at the river was to immediately refill my water bottle. I have been drinking moderately to save water, but it was a needless worry. Title: Compressed water bottle. Rank: B+. Description: water bottle with the ability to store up to 50 liters of water without affecting the weight. I mean, this water bottle could store up to 50 liters of water. Wasn't that totally awesome? Before leaving for the Clayton Ridge, I picked up this little baby at the train station, and I couldn't say I was dissatisfied with it. Not only could it hold up to 50 liters of water, but thanks to its advanced technology it could also reduce the weight of the contents by a factor of 10, meaning that a filled water bottle would only weigh 5 kilograms. Well, that last feature was a must-as. I mean, what was the point of carrying a bottle that could hold up to 50 liters of water when you couldn't even hold it? The thing that most shocked me about the water bottle wasn't its amazing technology, no, it was actually its price. It only cost me 20 U. The U is the currency that was used in this world, and it stood for Union, which was the current association overlooking humanity, besides the central government that was an alliance between the biggest nations from before the second cataclysm began. The Union was currently the foremost organization in the human domain, which only the central government could control. Even the biggest guilds operating do not dare challenge the authority of the Union, as it would spell permanent doom if they clashed against them. The Union has the highest number of S-ranked heroes at its disposal, making it a behemoth that stood at the peak of humanity. What makes the Union especially fearsome was not the fact that they had the most amount of S-ranked heroes at their disposal. No. It was their leaders. The 7 heads of the Union. With the power that far surpasses S rank, breaking through to the legendary SS rank. Currently, there only exist 15 SS rank heroes in the human domain, and out of all of them, 7 are part of the Union, making the Union the main powerhouse in the human domain. Each head was a single-digit ranker in the hero ranking, which depicts the strongest members of humanity. The ecosystem was a system created by the central government and ranks an individual based on their achievements and strength. This was a system that was created with the purpose of motivating individuals to become stronger, as not only does this bring glory to their name, but appropriate monetary compensation was given every year to top-ranking heroes. Since the Second Cataclysm, humanity has been split into 2 factions: heroes and villains. Where the villains were individuals that were categorized based on the crimes they had committed. The central government has placed a bounty on the head of each villain, and the reward increases as the rank of the villain increases. But to truly be characterized as a villain, an individual must sign a pact with a demon. That was a pledge to devote their lives to the demons, in which the demon in return grants them part of the power. As you currently in a standoff against multiple races. In order to weaken their opponents, they resorted to methods that created internal strife, and by giving power to individuals who were willing to follow their command for the sake of power, they successfully managed to continuously weaken their enemies. This formula, which has worked for eons, allowed demons to propel themselves into becoming a dominant race across the universe. Facing the constant pressure from the demons both externally and internally, only an organization such as the Union could barely keep the power balance among humanity in check. Currently, I had 250 with me, but if I needed more money I could just ask my parents. Forgot to say this, but when I was reincarnated in this world I found out that I had a mother, a father and a little sister who was only 2 years old. More importantly, apparently, my father was the guild master of a medium small-sized guild called Galxicus. Because I have no recollection of ever including this guild in my novel, it could only mean two things. Significant to the plotline, or that my reincarnation has had a butterfly effect on the story and thus created Galxicus. I honestly prefer the first option, as the second option would mean that some events will deviate from the story, which brings an element of uncertainty to the story that I know. Letting out a sigh, I take out a small cube from my bag. I then proceeded to press a small button on top of the cube and threw it on the ground. Sham! Immediately the cube enlarged into a large blue tent that was around the size of one room. Watching the cube automatically unfold before my eyes, I couldn't help but let out a gasp of amazement. Title: Compressed Tent. Rank: G+. Description: using the skin of a blood-curling bat, a 2 meters squared tent can be erected with a single press of a button. It's so cool. If I had this stuff back in the world I lived in, I would totally go camping. I mean, I could literally set up the tent in seconds without going through the trouble of actually setting the tent. Looking inside the tent, I couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. It was empty, but it was really spacious. It could totally fit in more than 5 people, and more if we were to really push it. Moreover, since it was made from the skin of a blood-curling bat AG-ranked beast, it was far more durable than normal plastic, and some could say it was comparable to some metals in terms of durability, making it an extremely good tent. Taking out my sleeping equipment, I comfortably lay inside the tent and closed my eyes. I was so exhausted that I fell asleep within a couple of seconds of me laying down. The next day, after packing up my stuff and eating breakfast in the form of an energy bar, I continued my journey towards the 5-star Marshall Manual by walking alongside the river. The good news was that I knew what I was looking for as I proceeded forwards. The bad news, on the other hand, was that I had no idea how long I needed to walk before finding what I was looking for. I could only lament at myself for being lazy. When I was writing the traveling scenes, I completely left out the important information such as how long the protagonist walked, or sometimes I even skipped that altogether and just made the protagonist arrive at the destination by omitting his journey. Thus, even if there was a cheat item I really want to get, I wouldn't even know where to look, as my lazy self did not write where the place was. I only wrote the general area. But that was also useless because some areas were so big that it would take me years to explore. Moreover, I also excluded the dangers lurking around the area, making the chances of finding the cheat item even slimmer. You couldn't really blame me though. I mean, who'd expects themselves to suddenly be thrown inside of their own novel? Plus, I skipped the traveling scenes because they were simply too boring. Stopping myself, I stared at a strange rock before me. The rock was oddly shaped and its outline resembled that of a samurai that held a sword on top of its head. I say resembled, but it was currently covered under moss and vines, making so that if one did not look carefully they would have never been able to spot this. Of course, I knew why it looked that way, as it wasn't actually a rock but a statue in memory of Grandmaster Kiki. As time passed, the statue slowly deteriorated, making it look like an oddly shaped rock to anyone who would pass by. Sitting down, I lay a small cloth and sat on it. And now we just wait. What I was waiting for was for the sun to set, as only when the sun sets would I know exactly where to go. The statue was made by Grandmaster Kiki back when he was still alive and was designed so that every sunset would point where his tomb remained. From this point on I was strictly following what I wrote about how to find the tomb of Grandmaster Kiki. In first place, the protagonist never actually bothered coming here, as he didn't choose the Kiki style but the Levisha style, making this the first time anyone actually came here. It didn't take long for the sun to finally start to set, and precisely when the sun moved right above the statue that a golden line emerged from the tip of the sword. Looking at where the line went, I could approximately determine that it was pointing northwest towards what seemed to be a large but inconspicuous tree far off in the distance. Bingo! Smiling widely, I immediately took a mental note of the tree and made a run for it. It takes approximately 150 to 200 seconds for the sun to set. That means that I only had that little amount of time to run from the statue to the tree, or at least close to the tree, which was at least a kilometer away from where I was. If I didn't make it close to the tree by the time the sun sets, I would easily lose sight of the tree, as apart from being slightly larger than any other tree, it looked exactly the same as any other tree in the area. If not for the statue directly pointing at the tree, I would have never been able to know where to go. Huff, huff, huff. Arriving with heavy breaths, I slumped down in front of the tree. I was totally exhausted. I sprinted at full speed in a rough terrain until I made it in front of the tree. By the time I had arrived, the sun had already set, but I didn't care as I had already reached my objective. Now what should I do? Even though I was the author, I was totally clueless in regards to what I should do next, as I had never written a scene where the protagonist went to Grandmaster Kiki's tomb. I didn't even know if there were any traps or trials inside of the tomb. The only thing I knew was that the tomb was somewhere near this tree in front of me. Carefully looking around the tree, I noticed a root that stuck out from the ground. Placing my hands on it, I noticed that it was fairly loose compared to the other roots that were firmly etched on the ground. Without a second thought, I immediately pulled the root with all my power. Snap! With a loud sound, the root directly ripped off from the ground, revealing a small hole that could fit a single person. Throwing the root to the side, I immediately made my way inside of the small hole. The first thing I noticed when I entered the hole was that everything above the tree was hollow, and a single rope dangled from the top of the tree. Gulp. Following my line of sight, I involuntarily gulped as I noticed the rope that was dangling from the top of the tree going all the way down inside of a pitch-black bottomless hole in the middle of the ground. Looking down the hole, I couldn't help but feel cold sweat drip from my back, as it truly did look like there was no end to the hole. Gathering up my courage, I held tightly onto the rope and slowly made my descent down the hole. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours, by the time my hands were numb, I had lost count of how long I had been going down the rope. My arms and my core at this point were starting to burn from the pain of continuously going down the rope, and before I knew it, my mental state was also degrading. Still, regardless of how much I was suffering, I endured the pain and continued making my way down the hole.